Welcome to the first full video in the While We Speak video series. And this video is going to be about Sudan, because in January of next year there's going to be a referendum in South Sudan as to whether or not to secede from North Sudan. And if they do choose to secede, it would be in roughly a year's time, in about July of 2011, that we would see a new country come into formation. Now obviously that's important for the people of Sudan. That's 42 million people that would be affecting directly, specifically 10 million people in South Sudan. But it could be very important for neighbours like Egypt and Chad and Ethiopia, Congo, Uganda, Kenya, and the Central African Republic, among others. And also could be important for the world. So I'm going to use GoogleEarth and the famed zoom-in technique to actually highlight Sudan. And you can probably see, just from this view from space, actually almost the exact borders of South Sudan, because that green area in the south, that's actually the beginning of sub-Saharan Africa. And the north, which kind of borders on the Sahara Desert, is a completely different geographical region. And there's other differences between South and North Sudan. South Sudan is predominantly Christian and animist, and North Sudan is the majority is Muslim. And there's literally hundreds of different tribes in Sudan, and I think there's about 400 different dialects in the country. So going into this referendum, there's lots of different, quite complicated issues. I think one that's quite interesting to think about in this financial climate in the West is if there is a new country created, how are they actually going to divide the national debt? What portion of that debt is the South going to get? And for countries in the developed world, like in the UK, if we had a county, or in the US a state seceding, it would be quite an interesting question. What portion of the debt would they receive? Another even more important question to Sudan is actually who gets the oil, and who gets the oil revenue specifically, because the vast majority of the oil actually comes from the south and goes up in a pipe that goes quite near the White Nile, up to Khartoum, and then up to Port Sudan. And the north currently gets the vast majority of the revenue of that. And obviously the south has a big interest in actually changing the way that works, and that is one of the big issues coming up for the referendum and how it might work. Now I'll just show the exact boundaries of Sudan in the Wikipedia page. But there are other issues as well going into the election. One of them would be who can actually vote in the referendum, because it's supposed to be for South Sudanese, but who counts as South Sudanese? Could internally displaced people in Khartoum, around Khartoum, who were originally South Sudanese, could they vote? That's another issue. Could refugees in Ethiopia or Uganda, could they come back and be allowed to vote? So that's another issue. One issue which we would never get in the West or in the developed world, but it's a big issue in places like Sudan, is transboundary migratory populations. That's basically, to sum up in one word, that's nomads who go from South Sudan to a different region. And would they be allowed to vote? They tend to herd animals who need to be in different regions based on different seasons. But would they count as South Sudanese? How would they be affected as citizens if they did become two new countries? Now in this map you can see actually the far more well-known region of Sudan, which is Darfur in green. And in orange is North Sudan, in blue is South Sudan. And actually Three other regions may well be holding referendums that decide whether they want to become part of the North or South. In particular, quite an oil-rich region is Abyei, which is in red. Now, you can see here also in the Wikipedia entry, Southern Sudan has areas of spectacular beauty and importance in terms of wildlife. So really, even though there is massive troubles going on in the country, we shouldn't forget that actually there's areas of incredible beauty and natural importance in the country. The second largest wildlife migration in the world. Now, going back to the people of Sudan, as well as talking about all this current affairs stuff going on in Sudan, I wanted to try and give a more longer term look at the country rather than just focus on this year or next year. So for that, I rely on the Population Reference Bureau, which give literally hundreds of facts about countries going all the way into 2050 and beyond. And it really is an invaluable tool for me. And it gives so many different statistics in so many different areas. I'm often researching different countries and finding out what their futures might be based on the data. And it's a completely independent source as well. So it really is very reliable and interesting. So we see for Sudan, as it loads, that the current population of Sudan is, there we go, 42 million. But look, it's growing to 75, almost 76 million in less than 40 years. So it's only going to become more and more important as the decades go by. You see here a terribly high infant mortality rate of 81. That's compared to, for example, 5 in the UK. A life expectancy of 58, again, very low, and GDP of 2,000. But even though, obviously, the GDP of 2,000 per person is extremely low, it is lower in other countries. For example, I think in Zimbabwe it's around about 500. So Sudan isn't, by any stretch, the poorest country in the world. Now, just a few more statistics from the Population Reference Bureau would be, if we just scroll down here a bit. I mean, there's hundreds that you can see even just here. You've got a vast youth population. It's heavily quite a young country. And if we scroll down here, this one is quite interesting to me. CO2 emissions per capita is only 0.1, and yet Sudan is gonna bear the brunt of a lot of the effects of climate change over the coming decades due to their position between the Sahara and Sub-Sahara. So they really are going to bear the brunt of climate change, and yet they contributed a minuscule amount actually to the problem. So that, and then just the final statistics, if you just look at the too low, it is too low, this literacy rate. Now, one statistic I got actually from the CIA World Factbook, and it really amazed me when I first saw it. And it really shows you the changing geopolitics of Sudan and the whole region, is the exports from Sudan. You'd think it was the surrounding region, you'd think it was Egypt or Ethiopia, but actually almost 80% is just to two countries, China and Japan. And that really shows you just how dominant oil has become to the economy. And not just that, how Asian powers are really playing an increasingly important role in Sudan and the whole region. But I didn't want to end just on those economic facts. There are a few signs of hope in Sudan. For example, almost 2 million displaced people have actually returned to South Sudan since the war ended officially in 2005. So that is a sign that perhaps hope is beginning to emerge there. And also, before the recent downturn in oil prices and the global recession, Sudan was growing in 2006 and 2007 at 10% of GDP per year. So economically as well, there is hope for the future. Now, I hope all of that gave you a brief insight into the country of Sudan.